There are very few women leaders. Women love to tell stories. They have been telling stories for a long time, like the famous Scheherazade. Every day, many women tell stories to important men. I heard a story about one special woman leader. This story is a mix of an old Arabian Nights tale and the Cinderella story. In New York, there is a very old hotel. You might have seen pictures of it in magazines. It was built a long time ago, when there was nothing above 14th Street except an old trail to Boston. Soon, this old hotel will be torn down. When it is destroyed, many people will gather and feel sad about losing this old place. People love this old hotel, especially one man who remembers being kicked out from its free lunch counter in 1873. At this hotel, Mrs. Maggie Brown always stayed. Mrs. Brown was a thin woman, about 60 years old. She wore old black clothes and carried a very old handbag that looked like it was made from an alligator. She always stayed in a small room at the top of the hotel for $2 a day. Every day, many important men came to see her because Mrs. Brown was said to be the third richest woman in the world. These men were the city's richest business people, asking for big loans from her. The hotel's typist and stenographer was Miss Ida Bates. She was very beautiful and kind. Some people said just seeing her was like going to school. She sometimes did some typing work for me. She didn't ask for money in advance, so she saw me as a friend. She was always kind and nice to everyone. No one behaved badly around her. Everyone in the hotel, from the owner to the porter, would defend her if needed. One day, I walked past Miss Bates's small office and saw someone else, a woman with black hair, typing with just her 2 index fingers. I thought about how things change and kept walking. The next day, I went on a 2-week vacation. When I came back, I walked through the hotel lobby and saw Miss Bates again. She looked as beautiful and kind as ever. It was closing time, but she asked me to sit and chat for a few minutes. She explained why she had been away. "How are your stories going?" she asked. "They're going okay," I said. "I'm sorry," she said. "Good typing is important for stories." "Did you miss me?" "Yes," I said. "No one types as well as you do." "But I saw someone else in your place the other day." "I was going to tell you about it," Miss Bates said. "You know about Maggie Brown, who stays here. She is very rich, worth $40 million. She lives in a small apartment in New Jersey and always has a lot of money. Many important men come to see her because she is very rich. 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Brown watched me for 10 minutes while I was working. I didn't look at her because I was busy and didn't need to. That evening, she asked me to come to her room. I thought I would have to type a lot of boring documents, but I went anyway. I was very surprised. Mrs. Brown was acting very friendly. "Child," she said, "you are the most beautiful person I have ever seen. I want you to stop working and come live with me. I have no family except for a husband and a son or 2, but I don't talk to them. They just spend my money. I want you to be like a daughter to me. People say I'm stingy and mean, and the newspapers lie about me doing my own cooking and washing. That's not true. I send out my washing, except for small things like handkerchiefs and stockings. I have $40 million in cash and stocks. I'm a lonely old woman and need a friend. Will you come live with me? I'll show people I can spend money. Well, what would you have done? Of course, I said yes. And to be honest, I started to like old Maggie. It wasn't just because of her money. I was lonely too. Everyone needs someone to talk to about their little problems. You can't talk about those things with men you meet in hotels. They're just looking for a chance to flirt. So I left my job at the hotel and went with Mrs. Brown. She seemed to like me a lot. She would watch me for a long time when I was reading or looking at magazines. One time I asked her, "Do I remind you of someone from your past, Mrs. Brown? You look at me a lot." "You have a face just like a dear friend of mine," she said. "But I like you for yourself too." And guess what she did next? She took me to a fancy dressmaker and told her to make me beautiful clothes. Money was no object. The dressmaker worked very fast and locked the door to finish the job quickly. Then we moved to a very expensive hotel, the Hotel Bonton. We had a 6-room apartment that cost $100 a day. I saw the bill. I began to love that old lady. When my new dresses started arriving, I was so happy. I called her Aunt Maggie. You know the story of Cinderella, right? Well, what Cinderella felt when the prince put the glass slipper on her foot was nothing compared to how I felt. Then Aunt Maggie said she was going to give me a big party at the Bonton Hotel. It would be a very fancy party, better than anything the rich families on Fifth Avenue could do. "I've been to parties before, Aunt Maggie," I said, "but I'll come out again. But you know, this is one of the best hotels in the city, and it's hard to get important people to come." "Don't worry about that, child," said Aunt Maggie. "I don't send invitations, I give orders. I'll have 50 guests here, men who owe me money or want to borrow from me. Some of their wives won't come, but many will. I wish you could have been at that party. The plates and glasses were gold and crystal. There were about 40 men and 8 ladies, plus Aunt Maggie and me. You wouldn't have recognized the 3rd richest woman in the world. She wore a new black silk dress with so much decoration that it sounded like hail on a roof. And my dress. It was all handmade lace and cost $300. I saw the bill. The men were either bald or had white whiskers, and they kept talking about money, politics, and the cotton crop. On my left was a man who talked like a banker, and on my right was a young man who said he was a newspaper artist. He was the only one I was going to tell you about. After the dinner, Mrs. Brown and I went back to our apartment. We had to push through a crowd of reporters. That's what money does for you. Do you know a newspaper artist named Lathrop? He's tall, has nice eyes, and talks easily. No? Well, all right. When we got upstairs, Mrs. Brown called for the bill right away. It came, and it was $600. I saw the bill. Aunt Maggie fainted. I got her onto a lounge and tried to help her. "Child," she said when she woke up, "what happened? Was it a raise in rent or a tax?" "Just a little dinner," I said. "Nothing to worry about. Sit up and pay attention. Maybe we have to leave if there's no other way." But, man, do you know what Aunt Maggie did? She got scared. She moved me out of the fancy Bonton Hotel at 9 the next morning. We went to a rooming house on the Lower West Side. She rented 1 room. It had water on the floor below and light on the floor above. After we moved in, all you could see in the room were about $1,500 worth of new, fancy dresses and a one-burner gas stove. Aunt Maggie had a sudden change of heart. Everyone has to go on a spree once in their life. A man spends his money on drinks, and a woman spends hers on clothes. But with $40 million, well, that's different. By the way, did you ever meet a newspaper artist named Lathrop? A tall guy with nice eyes? Oh, I asked you that before. He was really nice to me at the dinner. Maybe he thought I'd inherit Aunt Maggie's money. 3 days of living like that was enough for me. Aunt Maggie was as loving as ever. She didn't want me out of her sight. But let me tell you, she was really cheap. 75 cents a day was her limit. We cooked our own meals in the room. There I was, with $1,000 worth of new clothes, cooking over a one-burner gas stove. On the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't handle cooking a cheap meal while wearing a $150 dress with lace. So, I put on the cheapest dress Aunt Maggie bought for me. It's the one I'm wearing now. Not bad for $75, right? I left all my old clothes at my sister's place in Brooklyn. Mrs. Brown, I said, I'm leaving. I can't stay here any longer. I'm not a worshiper of money, but I can't stand this. I thought you had $40 million. You won't have any less if you spend a bit more. And I was starting to like you, too. Aunt Maggie cried and begged me to stay. She offered to move to a nicer room with a 2-burner stove and running water. I've spent a lot of money, child, she said. We need to save for a while. You're the most beautiful person I've ever seen, and I don't want you to leave. But here I am. I walked straight to the Acropolis and asked for my job back. I got it. How are your writings doing? I know you've missed me typing them. Do you ever have them illustrated? By the way, do you know that newspaper artist? Oh, never mind. I keep asking you. I wonder what paper he works on? It's funny, but I think he wasn't just interested in Aunt Maggie's money. If I knew some newspaper editors, I'd. The sound of footsteps came from the doorway. Ida Bates saw who it was through the reflection in her comb. She turned pink, like a perfect statue. Am I excusable? She asked me. It's Mr. Lathrop. I wonder if it really wasn't about the money. I wonder if he... Of course, I was invited to the wedding. After the ceremony, I pulled Lathrop aside. You're an artist, I said, and haven't figured out why Maggie Brown liked Miss Bates so much? Let me show you. The bride wore a simple white dress, beautifully draped like the costumes of ancient Greeks. I took some leaves from one of the wreaths in the room, made a crown, and placed it on Ida's shining chestnut hair. I turned her profile to her husband. By jingo, he said. Isn't Ida a dead ringer for the lady's head on the silver dollar?